Good evening, traveller. Today's topic will be very interesting, believe me. Have you ever heard about Odin's secret children, whom he secretly hid from everyone, and about whom almost no one knew, and who were never mentioned anywhere but secret information about them was found, and today I will tell you about it. But before that, please write what time it is for you, and what city you are from, and also please like and subscribe to the channel. And now let's move on to the beginning. In the elder hush before clocks learned to measure longing, rumours travelled the driftways of Yggdrasil, whispers that slid along bark and root, across the patient rings of time, into the ears of owls and the dreaming of stones. They spoke of children who did not belong to any hearth, who walked like weather and carried silence the way kings carry crowns, who never gave their names to mead halls or grave mounds. Those who glimpsed them said a mirror showed not a face but the tilt of ravens over fjord water, the quiver of northern lights across black winter. Some called them illusions, crumbs of prophecy shed by the Norns. Others called them omens that had learned to wear boots. The wise gave them a title that was neither praise nor blame, the Secret Children of Odin. Who could count them when even their shadows would not agree? A shepherd once swore he saw one sleeping in a ring of sheep, lambs curled like commas about a sentence not yet spoken. A skald whispered of a girl whose braids were braided again by the wind itself, who sang to her echo until it grew brave and sang back. None knew their mothers, none saw the god arrive with swaddling, and yet each rumour tasted of iron, smoke and stars, as if the black-hooded wanderer had tapped the anvil of the world and left a ringing in the blood. In the halls of the Aesir, they said, a door existed that was not a door, tucked where rafters met darkness. Stare too long and you would recall things that never happened, forget those that did, as if memory were a cloak reversed to show a different weave. On certain nights when the mead lapped lazily at the lip of its golden bowl, Odin would glance toward that not door and lift two fingers as though measuring the distance between stars. The ravens would hesitate, the wolves' paws would still against the floor. Some insisted he kept another council there, with faces no one could remember upon waking, though pine smoke on the skin insisted someone had stood near. These were not bastards of scandal, but riddles of purpose. Sometimes they bore kindness like a lantern hooded with leather, letting out slivers of mercy in pale triangles across the snow. Sometimes they carried the clarity of a blade that frees a trapped paw and counts the blood as part of the rescue. Their deeds fled the boasting benchers, their footprints did not instruct bards. They preferred thresholds, the moment before dawn that looks back at night with affection, the bend in the path that becomes a gate if you ask politely. They were the children of questions, of the hunger that taught a king to become a wanderer and pull his hat low against the rain. If you ask where they came from, I will show you a gate of mist beneath the ash where roots enter dreams. Wanderers go there to barter an hour of warmth for a sack of silence, and sometimes it is enough to hear what was never told. Odin, hungry for knowing, paid with his eye at Mimir as well, and learned how to see past seeing. But there is a knowing beyond even that, a weather of understanding that arrives like snowfall, each flake a secret, the weight of the whole drifting the world into a new shape. The secret children came from that patient storm, released to walk as people, to do what a raven cannot and a rune may only imply, offspring not of scandal but of necessity and wonder, trusted with errands the All-Father dared not announce to court or foe. Let me tell you of the first I met, though the meeting was a knot in the thread that looks like nothing until you finger it in a dim room. It was late season, when the sun thinks long before lifting its head and frost writes its messages on every plank. I had gone to the coast to ask the horizon a question I will not repeat. By the tide line lay a length of rope that had learned too many names for storm. A boy sat near it, stoking a driftwood fire that celebrated every colour. He did not look at me, but the way the air leaned about him told me he belonged to a task older than my breath. When he spoke, his voice was like a thin bell carried across snow, and the wave that came ashore seemed to bow. "You will tell a story," he said, "and in telling it you will make a door. You must choose whether it opens inward or outward." He smiled, and though my heart trembled, I laughed softly so the gulls would stay. "If I open a door," I answered, "let it be one that remembers the heel that turned." The boy fed the fire a wet log that should not have burned. In the smoke I saw scenes not yet lived, a winter market where a girl traded a song for a cloak, a frozen river carrying the reflection of a palace that did not exist, a black dog waiting at the wood's edge until a lost hunter learned the word for home. A pair of raven feathers flickered in his hair and vanished like advice swallowed before pride could hear it. "Tell it well," he added, "and the others will come." So I begin here, with snow combing the dunes and a small fire rehearsing sunrise, with the certainty that secrets walk because walking humbles certainty. The secret children of Odin do not gather in assemblies of witness, but if the heart grows very still, you may hear them passing. A soft footfall, a hush in the trees, the soul of the world adjusting its cloak. They step between truth and tale where the seam is neatest and the needle glints. From this ember of meeting we will follow their trail, learning slowly, kindly, how a god hides 100 necessary mercies in the shape of mortal lives. In the dawn that followed that tide-line ember, the weather changed its breathing, and I felt the long rootways stir as if the ash were listening. The boys' fire cooled to grey. When the wind lifted it, the flakes arranged themselves for a blink into runes I could almost read. They told not a name but a beginning, and in the north a beginning often looks like a circle, a track in snow no hunter made. Origins behave here as if they had already happened and were waiting for us to arrive with the right silence. There is an undercroft to the world where frost keeps its treasures in cedar boxes and dew is stored in pearls. No hand can thread. Beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, a door keeps forgetting to be seen. When Odin sought counsel, even ravens could not fetch. He bent his knowing toward that seam and walked as if his bones remembered driftwood. He brought no retinue, only the habit of arriving as though he had always been there, and at the threshold laid down the weight of his name. Within, the dark was of that clean kind one finds under lake ice. The Norns kept their counsel, their looms singing the soft arithmetic of threads. A bead of water fell, and the music altered by a hair. Odin understood. Knowledge was no longer enough. Need required neighbours, necessity required emissaries, who could go where a god's fame turns help into spectacle. He asked without asking. The loom slowed, shuttles moved with a tenderness that would have embarrassed any court. No mothers appeared, but gestures did. Daylight's bow on a windowsill, dusk at a barn threshold, the last coal greeting the first star. From such nods the children took their first shapes. The first to take a place in the day had a laugh like birch bark peeled in one clean stroke. She walked a winter market and traded the thaw of her smile for a merchant's failing hope. A second stood outside a shuttered house and listened until the grief inside invented a door to step through. They did not give names. Names would have nailed them to places that needed visitors, not owners. They left no signatures. Their secrecy was not concealment for pride, but a covenant with function. To proclaim a hidden mercy wrecks its grammar. Odin, who loved names because names are levers, loved this namelessness because it lifted without spectacle. So he kept a ledger no hand could hold, a gratitude allowed only by not thinking it finished. The Norns permitted it. Even fate likes to be surprised by how it keeps its promises. Rumour that barefoot courier carried omens in baskets lined with moss. Children not of any hearth began to vanish precisely when thanks would have anchored them. Songs rose in strange keys and concluded in resolve. Those who heard them woke kinder, puzzled by a happiness without a visible cause. In halls and huts, people argued gently about whether goodness done without witnesses counts the same. I kept to the shore where the boy had burned his many-coloured fire and learned that to follow such children one must carry no net, because evidence drowns truth in a tide pool of proof. I taught myself to count what would have broken and quietly did not. Once a storm swelled out of season and curled over the cliff, something unseen turned the knuckles into rain. Another time a raid that would have armed a saga collapsed into a meal when the first spear-bearer forgot his practiced shout and offered a greeting instead. I learned to call these alterations footprints. Not all their work was gentle. A forest that had fed on arrogance for 100 seasons caught fire at noon, clean bright, not wandering. It consumed what needed to be lessened, and left a path where caravan wheels could later find the moon. A lord who counted fear as rent found his tongue weighted one market day. He spoke only in questions until he learned to ask them without cruelty. In the high hall some noticed patterns and grew uneasy. Secrets attract suspicion not because they harm, but because they embarrass the desire to own the stage. There were those among the Aesir who loved Odin best when his plans wore armour and marched at noon. The knocked door, the strange relentings, the errands ending in changed weather, these made uneasy company. Loki smiled when such topics rose. not because he made them, but because he revered mischief that chooses mercy. One evening the boy returned to the tide line, older to the extent that a glance may be older. He tossed me a shard of bottle sea that had become sea's own colour. In it I saw a memory belonging to someone I had never met, a hunter confessing to the birches that he feared dying with his father's shout still trapped in his chest, a woman forgiving the river that kept her husband because his last breath had taught otters gentleness. I understood then that the secret children did not only mend the world, they taught the world to keep mending itself. Night deepened, and out on the black pane I saw a low lamp bob where no boat should be. A child walked there, light skimming along water as if pleased to be asked to participate in a quiet foltymole. The lamp turned once toward me and away, the way trust behaves in the first hour of friendship. I felt the old world tilt by a hair, like a coin considering which face to show. Tomorrow the market would open early, the nets would dry straighter, the Lord would ask a better question, and somewhere in the ashes' deep undercroft a forgotten seam would brighten, preparing to loose another necessary mercy that did not seek a name. The lamp upon the water drifted until the black pane swallowed its circle, and I was left with the hush of tide and the memory of flame in glass. In that silence another current began to braid itself beneath thought, the way rootlets thread around a stone unseen until the soil is lifted. The secret children, it seemed, were not only emissaries of sudden mercy, but of gradual reweaving. Each passing left the world altered in increments that only the patient could weigh, like frost engraving a window through nights too many to count. I walked inland where the pine air thickened with resin and the ground yielded in soft carpets. There the forest listened more than it breathed, and I felt I was trespassing in a chamber designed for conversations not yet spoken. A glade appeared, round as a pupil, and in it a girl sat cross-legged with no cloak despite the cold. She braided strands of reed into figures that did not resemble anything known yet, insisted on their own belonging. Her eyes carried neither fear nor welcome, only the composure of one entrusted with a task greater than comfort. I did not ask her name, knowing such a request would insult the very fabric of her being. Instead I watched as the figures she made fluttered into crows when the wind consented, scattering into the canopy with caws that echoed like questions freed. When she finally looked at me, the air grew taut as if it awaited its own decision. Her gaze conveyed a weight older than the soil, and I felt judged not by sin but by hesitation. "Do you remember what you nearly chose?" she asked, though her lips never parted. The words rang in marrow, not air. I could not answer, for the question braided itself around too many paths, each leading to an unlived hour. She smiled then, the reed figures collapsing back into green stalks at her feet, and rose without sound. Each step left an imprint not of boot but of dawn itself, pale washes of light dissolving before I could count them. Odin's ledger, unwritten yet indelible, grew heavier in my thoughts. Was each child a syllable in a sentence the god dared not speak aloud? I wondered whether even he, with one eye turned inward and one upon the horizon, fully grasped the sentences he had set adrift. For the Norns do not yield clarity without price, and the price often lies hidden in the very mercy one sought. Could these secret children be both shield and blade, healing and hazard depending on whose hand reached first? At night the forest pressed closer, branches knitting like ribs around a sleeping beast. I dreamt of a hall where torches wept resin, and Odin sat alone at a table set for 12 yet attended by none. Shadows leaned in the corners, their faces shifting too quickly for memory to seize. One rose, touched his shoulder, and whispered something that made the ravens cry out from their perch. The dream dissolved as if ashamed of its own disclosure, but I woke with the taste of iron on my tongue. The next morning, villagers along the fjord spoke of a stranger who had entered their hall, sat by the hearth and told a story that dissolved grief like salt in water. None recalled the face, none agreed whether it was man or woman, but all admitted their sorrow had shifted into a lighter shape. Some whispered that a secret child had walked among them, leaving behind not proof but relief, a rarer currency. Yet one old fisher shook his head. "Mercy carries a shadow," he muttered, "and where kindness lingers too long, balance comes seeking its due." It was then I understood that secrecy was not merely cloak but covenant. To reveal these children fully would tip the scales too far, granting mortals gifts they had not prepared to tend. So they came and went, appearing only at thresholds where despair outweighed endurance, retreating before gratitude could be idolized. Their hiddenness was not shame but architecture, ensuring the edifice of fate did not collapse under the weight of unearned ease. As twilight settled, the glade where I had met the reed girl stirred once more. From the tray line a low shape emerged, a boy with hair black as crow wings, carrying a staff made from driftwood scorched by lightning. His expression was solemn, yet his presence throbbed with restrained force, as though he bore storms in his ribs. He paused, gazed at me briefly, then struck the staff against the ground. The earth shivered, and far away thunder muttered, though the sky was clear. He said nothing, but the silence that followed bristled with intention. Something in the fabric of the world had been summoned, not yet arrived. When he vanished into the trees, I remained alone, the echo of that strike still reverberating beneath the soil. It whispered of trials to come, of reckonings hidden even from the Allfather's foresight. And though the air was calm, the pines upright, and the sky painted with ordinary dusk, I felt the great ash tremble ever so slightly, as though preparing to bear new weight upon its vast and secret roots. The tremor beneath the roots lingered long after the boy with the driftwood staff had disappeared into the pines, and the world carried it as a low hum no ear could quite locate. Animals behaved strangely that week. Dogs barked at doorways with no figure passing. Cattle turned their heads as if someone walked among them, unseen yet commanding. I knew the strike of that staff had not merely startled soil, it had awakened something long folded away. The secret children, it seemed, did not always arrive to mend. Sometimes they arrived to stir, to unravel the comfort that dulled the senses, to rouse the slumbering hunger of destiny itself. I followed the fjord path where cliffs leaned over dark water. Mists curled like sleeping serpents, and every gull's cry felt sharper, as if announcing a hidden presence. On a stone ledge above the tide, I found a figure cloaked in sealskin, sitting so still the salt spray seemed reluctant to touch him. His face bore no beard, though his eyes were ancient, pale as moonstone. He turned when I approached, and I felt a wash of vertigo, as though his gaze carried me to every shoreline at once. "There are storms that must be remembered," he said without speaking, and in that instant I saw fragments of wrecks strewn through centuries, ships broken yet guiding survivors to shores they had not meant to reach. His was the work of loss that transforms, of shipwreck that teaches the sea anew. He vanished when I blinked, leaving behind only a salt-crusted rope tangled at my feet. Word travelled of odd portents across the villages. Nets tore open yet yielded double the catch the next day. Hearths went cold without reason, then flared again when sorrow softened in the house. Midwives whispered that some newborns cried not once but twice, the second cry carrying a strange calm that settled everyone in the room. These events were spoken of in mead halls with nervous laughter, yet no one dared claim them wholly as blessings, for each soft mercy carried an edge, a reminder that balance must bend before it can steady. I began to sense a pattern. Each child embodied a different chord in Odin's hidden hymn. One arrived to soothe grief, another to ignite courage, another to strike fear into arrogance, another to conjure the taste of sea change. Their secrecy was not only shield but necessity, for to know their names would bind them to mortal expectation, and expectation is the chain that strangles wonder. Odin, wise in his solitude, had made them untethered so they might move where fate required rather than where worship begged. Still, not all gods shared his patience. In Asgard, murmurs stirred louder. Some of the Aesir grew restless, uneasy that the world bent in ways they did not order. Thor gripped his hammer tighter, muttering that if chaos dressed itself as mercy, it still deserved a blow. Frigg alone gazed toward the knot door, with eyes half saddened, half knowing, as though she understood that the children carried truths even she was not permitted to cradle. And Loki, ever the jester of consequences, praised their hiddenness with a grin too sharp to trust. He knew, as I began to suspect, that secrecy itself could become a weapon sharper than steel. One evening, at the border of forest and moor, I heard a flute playing. The notes drifted like mist over the heather, too fragile to belong to any hand. I followed the sound and found a boy carved from silence, his breath moving through a hollow bone. His melody bent the air until the stars above quivered, and in that trembling I glimpsed not constellations but faces, faces of men and women yet unborn, their gazes turned toward trials not yet written. It was then I understood that the children did not only heal the present, they rehearsed the future, pressing subtle cues into the fabric of what would be. When the music ceased, the boy lowered his flute and looked at me with an expression unreadable. both sorrowful and serene. Then he raised a hand, not in farewell but in warning, as though he sensed the next threshold drawing close. The more wind carried his image into smoke, and I stood alone beneath a sky that suddenly seemed heavier, a lid holding back waters not yet permitted to pour. The land grew restless in small ways afterward. Fires crackled too brightly, wind whispered secrets too plainly, shadows stretched longer than their masters. It was as though the world leaned toward disclosure, craving to reveal what had long been hidden, and I, who had followed their footprints in awe, felt the first true shiver of dread, for revelation carries weight heavier than mystery. Somewhere in the depths of Yggdrasil, the knocked door breathed like a creature stirring in its sleep. I knew then that the staff's thunder and the flute's lament were not isolated signs, but part of a greater weaving. The secret children were gathering threads, each unseen but inevitable, preparing a tapestry that would alter not only villages and shores but the balance of realms. And though night fell with ordinary stars above me, I felt as if the firmament itself was waiting to break into a new pattern, one no skald had yet sung. The firmament's quiet strain did not ease, but deepened as though the stars themselves had conspired to hold their breath. Nights grew denser, heavy with the sensation of watching eyes, though no figure could be seen. Travellers along the mountain passes spoke of hearing footsteps behind them, steady and unhurried, yet when they turned there was only moonlight pooled in the snow. Farmers swore that their fields held an extra furrow by dawn, drawn straight as if by an invisible plough. The secret children were moving more openly now, though still beyond the reach of naming. Their touch was the hush before thunder, their presence the weight of weather gathering at the edge of sight. One evening, in a valley where the river coiled like a silver serpent, I found myself drawn to a circle of standing stones. Frost filmed their faces, and the air there carried a solemn hush, the kind that makes even birds hold their wings still. Within the circle stood a youth, tall and spare, his hair pale as drifted ash. He leaned against one of the stones with his palm flat upon its cold flank, and in his eyes smouldered a sorrow so ancient it seemed borrowed from the earth itself. I dared not speak, for his silence felt sovereign, but I felt his grief seep into me as though the stone had opened its veins. He was one of them, I knew, carrying not mercy, not warning, but memory too heavy for the world to bear unaided. He turned slightly, enough for me to glimpse the scar that ran down his cheek, though I sensed no wound had cut it. It was a mark left by knowledge itself, carved by truths too sharp for mortal lids. His gaze slid past me into the horizon, where the mountains hunched like witnesses unable to testify. Then, like a sigh released after centuries, he pressed his forehead to the stone and vanished, leaving only the lingering impression that sorrow is sometimes the price of keeping the world upright. I left the circle shaken, yet more certain that Odin's hidden offspring bore burdens designed to shield others from their weight. Whispers travelled quickly that winter, tales of children with unfamiliar eyes entering halls uninvited, placing a hand on a warrior's chest until his anger dissolved into tears. Stories of unseen hands mending cracked beams in barns before storms broke. Rumours of shadows that carried bowls of food into huts where famine crouched. Some scoffed, others swore upon their ancestors' graves that the stories were true, but beneath the chatter lay an undercurrent of unease, for every kindness seemed sharpened with a hidden edge. A man saved from despair might find his next journey harder. A family fed by unseen hands might lose a field to blight the following season. Balance kept its vigil, unwilling to be cheated. In the halls of Asgard, suspicion ripened. Thor, whose heart was forged for clarity, thundered that such unseen hands mocked honour by refusing open challenge. Loki teased that perhaps the Allfather had seeded the world with riddles he himself could no longer untangle. But Odin remained unmoved, his one eye clouded with thoughts no skald could catch. He looked often to the ravens, as though seeking confirmation that even wings could not supply. Frigg alone would sometimes close her eyes at feasts, as if listening for footfalls that others could not hear. She seemed torn between dread and a quiet pride, as though the hidden brood belonged also to her by some secret claim of compassion. It was on a night of long moonlight that I encountered another. She stood by the riverbank where reeds bowed under frost, her reflection scattered by the current. She wore a cloak of wolf pelt, though no beast growled nearby, and her eyes shone with a feral light that did not distinguish between nurture and danger. When she lifted her hand, the water ceased its motion, freezing mid-ripple as though it feared her touch. She leaned close and whispered into the ice, and for a heartbeat I saw images bloom beneath the surface, villages swallowed by snow, halls crumbling under weight of silence, children lifting torches against a sky that would not answer. Then the ice shattered with a soft crack, the river resumed its run, and she was gone. I returned to the village unsettled. That night flames leapt in the hearth with unnatural vigour, and sparks danced like omens across the smoke. A dog whined at the door, its hackles raised though no intruder crossed the threshold. The people whispered of curses, yet I felt no malice in the woman by the river. Her vision had been warning, not cruelty, a glimpse of the storms yet unborn, storms the secret children were born to shadow. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of pathways splitting in forests, each leading to halls I dared not enter. At their crossroads stood children faceless yet familiar, holding out their hands as though asking me to choose a road that would break beneath whichever foot I placed first. And in the background, faint but insistent, I heard the low roll of thunder, like a drum beat counting down towards something vast. When I woke, frost had crept across the window in branching patterns too deliberate to be accident. They resembled runes, though none I had learned, and I knew they were not carved for me alone. Somewhere beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the knot door stirred again, opening a little wider, and the secret children walked further into the fabric of the world. Their work was no longer hidden only in whispers. It was threading itself into the destinies of gods and men alike, and the weight of their hiddenness pressed heavier upon the air, as if the world itself prepared for a truth too great to remain veiled much longer. The frost runes at the window lingered until morning sun thinned them into water, yet even as droplets slid down the glass they seemed reluctant to let go, clinging like memories that resist forgetfulness. I traced their paths with my finger, feeling an echo of the wolf-cloaked woman's gaze, and I knew her warning was not only for me, but for all who breathed beneath the ashes' shadow. Somewhere the balance was shifting, threads tightening in the loom of the Norns, and the secret children moved more boldly within that weave. I left the village and followed the river upstream, where cliffs pressed together until the water ran in a dark corridor, its voice hushed but insistent. The air smelled of stone, iron and pine sap, as though the earth itself was smelting something hidden. In that canyon I encountered another of them. He stood ankle-deep in the current, clad in garments so worn they seemed woven from shadow. His hair hung wet, and around his neck gleamed a pendant shaped like a serpent devouring its tail. He did not look up as I approached. Instead, he plunged his hands into the water and pulled forth stones smooth as eggs, setting them upon the bank in a line. Each stone glowed faintly before fading, leaving behind only the sensation that a choice had been made, though I could not see its outline. At last he lifted his gaze, and I felt the river pause as if attending a lesson. His eyes were riverstone grey, filled with patience sharpened by burden. Paths must be laid where no road wishes to go, his voice murmured inside my bones, and then he vanished, leaving only the serpent pendant on the stones. I did not dare touch it, for it pulsed faintly with the rhythm of breath as if alive. The message was clear enough. Some of the secret children were tasked not with healing nor warning, but with carving ways into the forbidden thickets of fate, making space for journeys even gods had not foreseen. Later, as dusk gathered along the canyon, a storm unfurled without sky darkening. Lightning writhed unseen, thunder growled beneath the ground, and animals fled though no rain fell. It was the echo of the driftwood staff's strike rippling outward in delayed consequence, calling the hidden brood into motion. Villagers far away felt it as sudden forgetfulness, hands pausing mid-labour without knowing why. Skalds muttered that words failed them, verses dissolving before they reached rhyme. Even gods turned uneasy glances toward the horizon, their feast songs faltering in half-cadence. The hidden brood was pressing against the edges of every realm. That night, my dreams unfurled in patterns jagged and luminous. I walked a hall with walls woven of branches, each leaf a fragment of a different life. Children played in shadows, their laughter sweet but never lingering, and each time I reached for one, they blurred into smoke, reforming further down the corridor. At the end stood Odin himself, hood low, staff in hand, yet he did not greet me. His gaze pierced past me toward the children, and I heard him whisper a name I could not recall upon waking, though its sound still trembled in my ribs when morning came. By then the people had begun to fear openly. A fisher refused to sail after finding his nets woven shut with threads he had not placed. A farmer swore his oxen bowed to invisible riders guiding the plough. Mothers told their children not to wander at dusk, for voices called sweetly from tree lines, promising safety that might lead elsewhere. Yet amid the dread lay gratitude too. Crops sprouted greener after a secret presence brushed the fields, and illnesses vanished when an unseen palm cooled fevered brows. Fear and blessing walked hand in hand, inseparable. I felt the weight of questions grow heavier. Did the secret children serve balance alone, or did they answer to Odin's private hunger, fulfilling designs even the Norns dared not chart? Each encounter hinted at a purpose vast enough to tilt the worlds, yet no single glimpse revealed the full tapestry. The serpent pendant haunted me. Though I had left it on the stones, its pulse echoed in my chest, a rhythm reminding me that cycles must complete themselves, whether of mercy or ruin. Toward the end of that season, on a night clear with brittle stars, I climbed the ridge above the canyon. The land lay spread below like a manuscript half erased. There, on the ridgeline, I saw them gathered for the first time, not all, but more than one. Shadows, slight and distinct, children who were not children, standing in silence, their faces turned toward the same invisible horizon. None spoke, none moved, but the air thrummed with the certainty of convergence. It was as if they were waiting for something to arrive, or perhaps waiting for the world to notice that it already had. When I blinked, they were gone, but the ridge still held their weight, as though the stones remembered. The night pressed colder, and I descended with the knowledge that concealment was loosening. The hidden brood was no longer content to walk only at thresholds. They were stepping into the center of the world's stage, whether invited or feared, and deep beneath the ash, the knot door exhaled once more. A sigh long enough to bend the dreams of every realm, a breath promising that what had been veiled was drawing closer to revelation. The sigh of the knot door seemed to trail across the ridge, long after the gathered figures had dissolved into absence. I descended slowly, for each stone beneath my boots seemed to echo, as though the land itself remembered more than it revealed. By the time I reached the river's edge, mist was rising in pale ribbons, curling between trees with the deliberation of fingers arranging a shroud. In that shifting veil, I felt a presence, and soon I discerned a child-shaped form walking the bank, barefoot, leaving no imprint on the mud. This one bore a calm unlike the others. I had met. Where some had carried warnings or sorrow, this figure carried stillness, a weightless composure that made even the reeds hush their tremors. The child bent to touch the water, and the river froze in a single arc. A silver blade stilled mid-motion. In the stillness I heard countless heartbeats, not my own, layered like the drumming of distant herds. For a breath I believed the world itself had stopped, leaning into this small hand's command. Then the child lifted their fingers, and the river sang forward again, but slower, as though reluctant to resume its endless haste. The figure turned to me, their eyes unclouded yet immeasurable, reflecting not stars but the entire sweep of sky, as though they carried the firmament inside them. They did not speak, yet I felt a question rise in my bones. Would mortals endure a truth that did not need to be hidden? The silence pressed on me until I lowered my gaze, ashamed, unable to claim such readiness. When I looked again, the figure was gone, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of frost upon the reeds, which quickly melted into dew. That night, tales spread among villagers that time had faltered. Some said their candles burned twice as long, others swore the moon had paused mid-ascent, hanging uncertain before continuing its climb. The shepherd insisted his flock had frozen mid-step, each animal holding still as though painted, until an unseen breath allowed them motion again. Fear mingled with awe, for such disturbances hinted that the hidden brood now moved not only in lives, but in the very flow of time. In Asgard, disquiet deepened. Skulls who once sang with certainty found their tongues stumbling. Thor grew restless, patrolling the golden hall as if battle might break through its doors at any moment. Loki, with sly amusement, whispered to those who would listen that perhaps Odin had fathered a brood of riddles too sharp even for his own keeping. Frigg alone maintained her calm, though sometimes her gaze strayed to the rafters where the knot door lay concealed, her expression a mixture of resignation and aching tenderness. I wandered further into the highlands, where wind scoured the stones clean and sky stretched wider than comprehension. There, at the crown of a ridge, I encountered another of the hidden ones. This child bore antlers sprouting from their brow, delicate yet strong, veined with gold light. They moved with the poise of a stag at dawn, each step unhurried, every motion steeped in a grace not borrowed but inherent. When their gaze found mine, I felt the tremor of forests uncut, of fields before the plough, of animals moving in harmony unbroken. They lifted their head, and I heard a call ripple through the mountains, though no lips parted. The wind answered, carrying scents of pine resin, wet moss, and something older still, the breath of wilderness before memory. I knew then that some of Odin's hidden children were guardians of what must never be wholly tamed. They bore within them the stubborn truth of wildness, ensuring no wall nor crown could claim absolute dominion. Their secrecy was survival. For were such figures known and named, kings would try to bind them, priests would build temples around them, and the wilderness would be caged. The child's antlers glowed once, and then their form blurred into the horizon, leaving me with the echo of hoofbeats that faded into silence. When I returned to the valley, the people had gathered around a strange omen. A single tree had sprung overnight in the village square, already grown tall, its branches laden with blossoms, though snow still lay heavy on the ground. No axe could bite its bark, no flame could scorch its petals. The villagers debated whether it was blessing or curse, while children played beneath it, their laughter brighter than ever before. I said nothing, for I knew this was the work of the antlered child, a reminder that life breaks through in defiance of all measures, and secrecy is the soil that protects it until it blooms. That evening, as I lay beneath the blossoming tree, I felt the ground pulse beneath me, a rhythm deep and slow, like the heart of Yggdrasil itself. In that pulse I sensed the secret children converging, not only in scattered mercies but in preparation. They were gathering strands across land, water, time, and wilderness, weaving them toward a knot the world would soon have to face. And though the air was sweet with blossom scent and laughter drifted nearby, a shadow of anticipation lingered, like the hush before a storm not yet seen but already moving. The hush beneath the blossoming tree lingered as though the petals themselves listened for something greater than spring. Villagers came to marvel, carrying offerings of bread and mead to leave at its roots, though no shrine had been asked for. Children climbed its branches with careless joy, and for them the blossoms never fell, clinging bright even when shaken. At night the petals glowed faintly, as if moonlight seeped from within rather than pouring down from the sky. Lying beneath that tree, I felt watched not by eyes but by intention, as if the hidden brood had pressed a sign into the very marrow of the village, a mark that destiny had begun to walk more openly among us. Yet wonder and unease, braided together, elders whispered that unnatural growth drew unnatural consequence. They remembered too well that gifts in the sagas seldom came without shadow. Still, no axe could bite the bark, and no hand dared uproot it. The tree became both omen and guardian, its roots drinking the tremor of the unseen gathering. Each night, as blossoms scented the frost air, I dreamed of children in silence, their faces half-lit, waiting on thresholds where no door yet stood. One night, as I woke beneath its branches, I saw a figure standing among the petals. This child bore hair blacker than crow wings, their cloaks stitched from pieces of midnight sky. Their eyes burned with a subdued fire, not wild but measured, as if every spark had been weighed and permitted. They extended a hand toward the tree, and blossoms cascaded into their palm, dissolving before they touched the ground. The air quivered as though something had been exchanged, promise for patience, secrecy for survival. Then they turned their gaze upon me. In that gaze I felt not judgment, but an inquiry older than mountains, as if they sought to know whether mortals could bear being written into the hidden ledger. Before I could shape an answer, the figure dissolved into shadow, leaving the branches whispering in the wind. The following day a wanderer came to the village, carrying wounds that should have ended him. Yet, when he slept beneath the blossom tree, his bleeding ceased, and his skin closed without scar. The people gasped at miracle, but some grew fearful. Healing so absolute felt less like blessing than theft from fate, and they wondered what toll would follow. A few began to avoid the tree, circling wide around it, while others prayed longer, clutching blossoms as talismans. Balance trembled like a blade between them. I journeyed on, carrying the memory of the midnight-cloaked child. The road bent toward fjords, where cliffs plunged into black water, and gulls cried like torn pages in the wind. There, upon a headland jutting into the sea, I found another of the secret brood. A boy sat with knees drawn to chest, staring into waves that rose higher than any ship's mast. His hair dripped as if he had just stepped from the sea, and his skin shimmered faintly like scales in half-light. When the surf crashed, he did not flinch. Instead, the water bent around him, breaking into arcs that kissed the rock at his side. His sorrow was palpable, a tide held back too long, pressing against his ribs. As I approached, he lifted his gaze and the sea stilled. In that pause I saw wrecks scattered across time, hulls shattered on reefs, crews swallowed by storm, treasures sinking to silt. Yet I also saw survivors dragged ashore by hands unseen, children carried in kelp cradles, villages nourished by the bounty released from drowned ships. His was the sorrow of necessary ruin, the kind that spares by breaking. He raised a hand once, as though commanding me to remember that mercy sometimes wears the mask of devastation. Then he sank into mist, leaving behind only the brine taste heavy on my lips. The villagers along that coast spoke of waves that had risen like teeth but collapsed before landfall. Sparing their homes, they gave thanks, though they trembled, for they knew no shield lasts forever. One elder whispered that such reprieve was a reminder. The sea loves no one, yet someone hidden had chosen to love them in its stead, and such love could never be endless. I returned inland unsettled, carrying the voices of tree and tide alike. In Asgard, the gods also watched with unease. Thor pressed Mjolnir against the hall floor, the sound like distant thunder demanding clarity. Loki, with sly humour, suggested that perhaps Odin had lost count of his own children. Yet Odin said nothing, only stared long into the mead, the reflection of his single eye shimmering as though it gazed upon depths unseen by others. The knot door above the rafters quivered that night, faint but undeniable, like a curtain stirred by a wind no hall contained. Those who sat closest to it felt a chill travel their bones, and even the ravens shuffled uneasily on their perches. It was a sign the hidden children were no longer scattered pieces but threads drawing nearer, their secrecy tightening around something vast. And though the hall returned to laughter soon after, an unspoken awareness hung heavy, as if all present knew the world would not rest long in its current shape. Beneath the stars I lay once more in the open air, listening to the wind comb the blossoms and the waves gnaw the headlands. Between them I felt the gathering, the hidden ones aligning like constellations preparing a pattern not yet drawn, and I knew the days ahead would bring not only omens but choices, for secrecy like blossom and tide could not hold forever. Something waited just beyond the veil, ready to press its weight upon the realms. The veil seemed thinner with each passing night, as though the stars themselves strained to see what stirred beneath the roots of Yggdrasil. The blossom tree glowed softly in the square, the waves gnawed their warnings into the headlands, and across valleys the hush of secrecy pressed like snow before avalanche. I felt the weight of the hidden brood everywhere, in still air, in sudden pauses of birdsong, in dreams where silence spoke louder than thunder. It was on a road skirting the marshlands that I encountered another of them. Mist rolled low, carrying the musk of peat in stagnant pools, and frogs croaked in dissonant unison, as if driven by a rhythm older than their throats. From that mist a boy emerged, no older than 12 by appearance, his cloak stitched from tattered feathers. His face bore the sharp delicacy of a raven, and when he moved, the frogs ceased, listening as though commanded. He regarded me with eyes ink-dark, alive with wit that flickered like sparks across dry tinder. Without sound, he opened his palm to reveal a small mirror. In its surface, I saw not my face, but the sum of every hesitation I had ever carried, roads not taken, words swallowed, mercies withheld. The vision struck deeper than any blade, for it was not condemnation, but reminder. The boy smiled faintly, a smile that knew too much, and with a snap of his fingers the mirror dissolved into mist. Ravens stirred overhead, black against grey, and when I looked again he was gone, leaving only the faint echo of wings. His presence lingered like a riddle, a truth half spoken, that the secret children did not merely shift the world around us, but pressed mortals to reckon with the worlds they had failed to shape. Whispers of similar encounters spread. A weaver in the highlands swore a child cloaked in feathers had visited her loom and forced her to unravel half her tapestry, leaving her in tears but freeing her from a design that would have foretold her son's death. A shepherd dreamed of a boy with raven's eyes, who revealed the exact night a wolf would breach his fold, sparing his flock, but stealing his sleep forever. The children's mercies were edged with cost, their secrecy sharpened into less. In Asgard, unrest ripened further. Thor demanded answers, declaring that hidden aid shamed the honor of open battle. Frey, whose realm was plenty, fretted that crops blessed by unseen hands might bind the people's gratitude to forces the gods could not summon. Yet Odin remained unyielding, though in his silences a storm brewed. Often he paced beneath the rafters where the knot door breathed, and once the ravens refused to leave his shoulders, as though even flight could not outrun what pressed upon his thoughts. The night after my meeting with the raven-eyed child, I dreamed of halls vast and empty, a table stretched longer than sight, laden with food untouched. At its centre stood the blossom tree, roots cracking through stone floor, blossoms drifting into bowls that dissolved at their touch. Around the table sat shadows in the shapes of children, each with a different gaze. Sorrowful, fierce, serene, wild. Odin stood at the far end, silent, his hand hovering above the table as though torn between blessing and banishment. Before I could hear his decision, thunder cracked through the hall, and I woke to the taste of smoke. The village lay restless, for a fire had swept a barn, though no spark had been lit. Strangely, the animals were untouched, standing calm in the ashes. Some called it miracle, others curse, but I saw the pattern, destruction that preserved ruin chosen as shield. Somewhere among the secret brood a child had walked unseen, trading timber for lives, balance again, sharpened through secrecy. I travelled further north, where glaciers glowed blue under moonlight, and the air cut like sharpened glass. There on an ice field I saw another. A girl knelt barefoot upon the frozen crust, her breath curling like incense, her hair a curtain of pale fire. Around her the ice cracked and reformed, reshaping into intricate rooms that burned with brief light before vanishing. She did not look at me, but her presence filled the silence with command. She was a keeper of forgotten words, etching truths too dangerous for halls or temples. The rooms glimmered, and for a moment I glimpsed fragments, prophecies of endings that curved back into beginnings, deaths that birthed more than they destroyed. Then the ice sealed itself, and she melted into the horizon, leaving the cold sharper, the stars closer. By the time I returned south, I knew the hidden brood was no longer content to brush the world's edges. They were inscribing themselves more boldly, pressing into memory and stone, forcing both gods and mortals to reckon with their necessity. Whispers grew of a reckoning, a moment when concealment would give way to disclosure. Some longed for it, others dreaded it, but all sensed it coming. And that night, as wind rattled the shutters and the blossom tree glowed faintly beyond the square, I felt a deeper tremor in the earth, steady, pulsing, like footsteps approaching from beneath. The knot door was stirring wider, and the children who had walked unseen were preparing to stand where every gaze must meet them. The tremor that pulsed beneath the earth did not fade, but grew steadier, as though some hidden procession marched upward from the roots of Yggdrasil. Villagers heard it in the quivering of their rafters, in cups that shuddered faintly on tables, in cattle that stamped uneasily though no wolf prowled near. The gods themselves felt it, though few admitted aloud. A hush fell across the realms, not silence but anticipation, as if the whole of creation leaned toward a door about to open. I walked into the hills where frost lay heavy upon the heather, and the air carried the metallic scent of change. There, at the crest of a ridge, I found a child wrapped in a cloak of twilight, its fabric shimmering with the faintest stars. They stood with their hands clasped before them, gaze fixed upon the horizon, where dawn strained against night's last veil. The air around them quivered, and I sensed that this child carried the weight of thresholds themselves, guardian of every edge where one state tips into another. When their eyes met mine, I felt myself held not as a man but as a moment, pinned between before and after. Their gaze contained every hinge of time, the instant before a sword strikes, the heartbeat before a kiss, the pause before words that will not be unsaid. They spoke without sound. All things turn. What resists breaking still bends. What clings to secrecy must one day stand in light. Their words pressed through me, neither command nor comfort, but inevitability itself. Then, as dawn broke, they dissolved into its radiance, leaving behind only the sense that each step I took was now marked by unseen witnesses. That day the villagers gathered in unease. The blossom tree shed petals though winter still clung, and each petal that touched the ground turned briefly to flame before fading into ash. Children pointed with delight, while elders muttered of omens too bold to ignore. Far off, fishermen swore the sea grew stiller than glass, the horizon bending as if bowed beneath unseen weight. These signs no longer whispered, they declared. In Asgard, voices rose louder. The gods demanded to know whether Odin had loosed forces even he could not govern. Heimdall, keeper of the Rainbow Bridge, swore he heard footsteps along its span. Though no figure crossed, Freyja, wise in love and sorrow, claimed her dreams were crowded with faces of children unknown yet unbearably familiar. Thor grew restless, insisting his hammer should be raised in challenge, while Loki laughed too quickly, warning that striking shadows only multiplies them. Through it all, Odin sat silent, one eye fixed not on the hall but inward, listening perhaps to the same footsteps I heard in my bones. That night my dreams deepened. I walked through a forest lit not by moon or fire but by the glow of countless eyes. Children stood between the trees, some with cloaks of feathers, some with antlers crowning their brows, some with sea salt dripping from their hair. They did not move, yet their presence pressed against me until I could scarcely breathe. At last one stepped forward, a girl whose skin shone faintly with frostlight. She placed her hand upon my chest and I felt my heartbeat falter, slow, then resume with a rhythm not wholly mine. "You will bear witness," she whispered, and though I tried to ask what must be witnessed, my voice would not rise. I woke with her touch still cold upon my skin. The following morning, the village well overflowed though no rain had fallen. The water glimmered with faint light, and those who drank from it swore they dreamed of paths leading into halls of gold and halls of ash, each demanding a choice. Some villagers feared to drink, others sought it eagerly, but all agreed that fate itself had begun to trickle into their lives. As days passed, signs multiplied. Birds flew in patterns shaped like runes, firelight bent into unfamiliar colours. Dreams became crowded with faces unknown. The secret children no longer brushed the world with subtle fingertips. They pressed upon it fully, bending its air, its water, its fire, its time. Secrecy was unravelling into presence, though no one yet dared to speak what that presence demanded. I stood one evening at the blossom tree, petals glowing faintly in the dusk. The air grew taut, and I felt them near. Not one, not two, but many, gathering unseen at the square's edges. Their silence was not absence, but gathering strength, as if they prepared to step into a world that had no name ready for them. And though the night sky spread calm above, I sensed the threshold child's words echoing true. What clings to secrecy must one day stand in light. The moment drew nearer, slow as roots yet certain as dawn. The dusk that gathered around the blossom tree carried a tension like drawn bowstring, though no arrow loosed. I could feel the hidden brood pressing nearer, not merely as omens, but as presences swelling at the edges of sight. Children laughed in the square, yet their play was muted, as though they too sensed unseen companions. The petals glowed more brightly than before, casting faint halos upon the cobblestones, and each glow seemed to hold its breath. I left the village to seek stillness in the high meadows where frost clung even beneath the noon sun. There, where the wind swept clean across grass and stone, I found one waiting. This child sat cross-legged upon a boulder, eyes closed, hair dark as night tide. Around them hovered faint motes of light, not fireflies but fragments of memory given shape. As I drew nearer, the motes swirled and I glimpsed visions inside them. A mother forgiving her son before battle, a chieftain laying down his axe, a girl choosing silence instead of revenge. These were not grand sagas but small mercies, tender choices woven into the bones of fate. The child opened their eyes and I felt the weight of every forgotten kindness pressing upon me, quiet yet vast. They did not speak, but their gaze pierced me until I lowered my eyes. When I looked again, the motes had drifted into the wind, dissolving into the air as though reminding the world of its own gentler truths. The child was gone, but their stillness remained, and I knew they were one who bore memory of the overlooked, guardian of the unnoticed mercies without which the world would collapse unseen. Returning through the valley, I heard villagers speak of sudden reconciliations, brothers long estranged clasping hands, quarrels forgotten as though never spoken. Some marvelled, others fretted, for such swift mending felt unnatural, but I knew the brood's touch was upon them, guiding hearts toward choices that shifted the loom's pattern in ways unseen. Yet even healing carried unease. Peace arrived too easily can unsettle those who trust struggle more than rest. In Asgard, the tension sharpened. Thor pounded his hammer upon the floor, declaring that hidden actors mocked the honor of open combat. Frey spoke of harvests ripening faster than season allowed, fearing that such abundance might exhaust the soil. Loki's laughter rang sharp, insisting that secrecy was the truest mischief, for it unsettled more deeply than any prank of his own. And Odin sat silent still, though his hand gripped Gungnir tighter than before. His eye burned with knowing, but whether that knowing gave comfort or despair, none could say. That night as sleep claimed me, I dreamed of the knot door above Asgard's rafters. It quivered, no longer subtle, and through its seam poured faint light, pale as dawn before it breaks. Shadows clustered around it. Children's shadows, their hands pressed against the barrier, as though longing to step through. I heard a murmur, countless voices braided into one. Not demand, not plea, but readiness. When the light flared, I woke, heart hammering, the echo of those voices still resonant in my chest. The following day, the earth groaned beneath the village, as though something vast shifted far below. The well overflowed again, but this time the water bore no light. It ran dark, like ink, staining troughs and soil before fading back to clarity. Farmers whispered of runes glimpsed in the dark current, messages they could not recall upon drying. Fear grew, but so did awe, for every shadow seemed now to hold meaning. The brood was not withdrawing. They pressed harder into the visible world. I climbed again to the ridges where glaciers glimmered. On an ice field I found another child. Their skin shone faint blue, veins bright with frostlight, breath curling into patterns that froze mid-air like crystal runes. They looked at me with a gaze both brittle and eternal, and the air tightened as though winter itself had bowed to them. When they exhaled, the ice beneath my feet cracked, yet I did not fall. Instead, the fissures spread outward, etching designs across the expanse, lines like rivers of light, forming a map too vast to hold. Then the child stamped once, and the ice sealed again, leaving me trembling with the certainty that paths had been set, though unseen by mortal eyes. They vanished into the blizzard, leaving me alone beneath stars that suddenly felt too close. By the time I returned, whispers ran wild, of rivers reversing their course for a day, of herds moving as one without command, of dreams so vivid they left bruises on waking skin. These were not accidents, but announcements, subtle hands revealing themselves with bolder strokes. The hidden brood was converging, their secrecy thinning until it shone transparent, and though the villagers huddled close to fire, and the gods held counsel with heavy brows, I felt the truth pressing clearer with each breath. What had walked in whispers now prepared to speak aloud. That evening, as I lay beneath the blossoming tree, petals glowing brighter than flame, I sensed them again, countless presences, circling just beyond sight. The air thrummed with expectancy, like the moment before a great bell is struck, and though the night was calm, I knew that when the sound finally came, no ear in any realm would remain untouched. The expectancy that circled the blossom tree swelled like a tide straining against its banks. The petals shone with a fervour almost unnatural, glowing brighter than flame yet never burning. Children slept uneasily, tossing beneath their furs, whispering names their parents did not know. The air itself seemed woven tighter, a fabric stretched to near breaking, every breath caught within its threads. I felt it in my bones. The secret children were no longer content to linger at the edge of vision. They leaned closer, pressing into the world with the inevitability of dawn. I climbed into the high passes, seeking air clean enough to still the trembling in my chest. Snow lay deep, crunching underfoot, and the sky above wore the pale shimmer of northern lights, though no night had fallen. Amid the whiteness I saw a figure moving steadily, cloaked in garments of ash grey. Their hood shadowed their face, yet around them the snow did not cling. Instead it parted, swirling aside as if reluctant to touch. As I approached, I felt the hush of endings settle around me, the solemnity of last breaths, the hush that follows a song's final note. When the hooded figure raised their head, I glimpsed eyes dark as the void between stars, yet within them glowed a compassion unbearable. They reached out one hand, and in their palm a flame flickered, not fire but something quieter, a light that held release. The snow around us melted into shapes, villages crumbling, warriors laying down arms, elders closing their eyes for the last time. Yet none of it carried terror. Instead it was softened, as though the figure bore the task of ending not with cruelty but with care. They did not speak, but the truth settled upon me. Among the secret brood was one who guided closures, who walked the edge where life yields to silence, ensuring that every door shut with dignity. The figure lowered their hand, and the flame vanished. The snow swallowed their form, and I stood alone, heart heavy yet strangely steadied. For the first time I understood that secrecy was mercy, not only for the world, but for the children themselves, burdened with roles too immense for open worship. To be named would be to be chained. To remain hidden was to serve freely, unseen yet essential. As I descended, I found villagers gathered by the river. They pointed to ice that had formed in the current overnight, not solid but carved into countless shapes of hands, reaching upward. When the sun rose, the ice melted, but each villager swore they had felt touched by unseen palms. Some comforted, some unsettled. Murmurs grew. Were these omens of protection, or signs that the hidden brood prepared to claim what lay beyond mortal grasp? That night Asgard itself shook. The knot door above the rafters flared with pale lights, spilling onto the hall below. Gods paused mid-feast, their goblets trembling, their laughter broken. Thor reached for his hammer, Freya pressed her hands to her temples, and even Loki fell silent. Odin rose slowly, his cloak heavy, his eye unblinking. For the first time in many seasons he spoke of what only he had long carried. "They draw nearer," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. Not to be named, but to be known. His words struck the hall like thunder muffled in snow, and no one replied. That same night, my dreams turned darker. I wandered through a field of mirrors, each reflecting not myself, but children I had glimpsed. The antlered guardian, the sea-born mourner, the raven-eyed trickster, the flame of endings. They stood within the glass, watching me, their gazes layered with sorrow and resolve. One mirror cracked, splintering across their faces, and from the fracture poured a sound like countless footsteps, endless and steady, marching towards something unseen. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth, certain that the fracture was real, not dream. In the days that followed, strange wonders grew bolder. Fires burned without consuming wood. Stars shifted their positions, forming runes that flickered before dissolving. Infants opened their eyes with expressions far older than their years, gazing as though recalling lifetimes. Villagers grew afraid to speak of it, fearing words would summon more. Yet silence offered no shield. The signs multiplied regardless. One evening, as I stood once more beneath the blossom tree, a sudden wind surged, scattering petals into a spiral. Within that spiral, I glimpsed them, dozens, perhaps more, children layered in light and shadow, their forms flickering like half-remembered dreams. They did not step forward, yet their presence pressed against me with such weight that I staggered. In their silence was a chorus, patience wearing thin, secrecy unraveling thread by thread. The petals settled, the wind hushed, and the night returned to calm. But I knew the world had been shown more than it was meant to bear, and the unraveling could not be stopped. The earth trembled faintly as I walked back to my dwelling, not with quake, but with heartbeat steady and immense. Somewhere beneath roots and stone, the knot door widened. The hidden brood, once scattered whispers, now pressed shoulder to shoulder, preparing for the moment when concealment would end and revelation would stride into the open air. The heartbeat of the earth grew louder in the nights that followed, as if Yggdrasil itself pulsed with a rhythm not wholly its own. Villagers lay awake, listening to the tremor through their floorboards, some mistaking it for storms beneath the ground, others whispering that it was the march of the secret brood drawing nearer to the surface. Children stirred uneasily in their sleep, murmuring fragments of strange songs, their voices echoing cadences older than their years. The blossom tree shed no more petals, holding them tight as though conserving its strength, its glow subdued but dense, like a coal preparing for flame. I journeyed westward, toward cliffs where wind carved the rock into vast hollows that moaned with the sea. There I encountered another of the hidden ones. A boy stood at the cliff's edge, his arms spread wide, cloak billowing like sails. His face bore no expression, yet his presence commanded the wind itself. Gusts bent toward him, swirling in patterns that etched runes upon the spray before dissolving. When he turned, I felt the air thicken around me, as if I were being weighed not by judgment but by necessity. He raised one hand, and the moaning cliffs fell silent. For a heartbeat the world stilled, waves halting mid-crest, gulls frozen mid-flight, and I realized he was one who governed the breath between storm and calm. He released his hand, and the sea exhaled, resuming its endless roar. Without a word, he vanished into the gust, leaving me with lungs heavy, as though I had breathed air too ancient for mortal ribs. The signs of their convergence deepened. Across villages, storms would halt at thresholds, lightning pausing as if restrained. Fire refused to consume when it might wound, yet flared swiftly to warn of unseen danger. The hidden brood pressed closer, no longer whispering through single mercies, but through the elements themselves. The people grew afraid. Some prayed fervently to Odin, begging him to banish what they did not understand. Others whispered thanks in the dark, afraid to speak aloud for fear the gods might overhear gratitude meant for children who bore no names. In Asgard, debate thickened into quarrel. Thor's restlessness sharpened, his hammer humming as though eager for contest. He argued that hidden hands meddling with wind and flame mocked the honor of open strength. Freya worried aloud that balance itself was unraveling, harvests too lush and rivers too restless. Freya admitted dreams haunted her, visions of children standing in halls of gold and ash, their gazes steady, their silence heavier than prophecy. Only Odin remained still, though his eye burned brighter, as though he watched not the quarrel but the deep tremor beneath their feet. He did not speak of it, but those who knew him sensed his heart carried both dread and pride. That night, my dreams returned me to the knot door. This time it no longer quivered faintly, but gaped slightly ajar, light spilling through in thin ribbons. Beyond it stood countless figures, blurred yet distinct, their eyes gleaming like constellations pressed too close. They did not reach outward, but inward, as if drawing the realms toward themselves. A voice, layered and braided of many voices, whispered, "When the door opens, fully, there will be no return to what was hidden." I woke with my hand outstretched, fingers aching as though I had tried to hold the seam shut. The villagers spoke of other omens. Wells ran with salt water, far from the sea. Herds turned in unison to stare at horizons empty of figures. Infants lifted their eyes skyward, as though tracking invisible stars. The world was bending, and its edges groaned beneath the pressure. Some elders murmured that Ragnarok itself might be seeded in this secrecy, unraveling. Others insisted it was preparation for a renewal that none yet understood. Whichever truth lay waiting, it was closer now than breath. One evening, as twilight bled into the valley, I stood again beneath the blossom tree. The air thickened until each sound grew muffled, as if wrapped in wool. From the corner of my sight, figures gathered, shadows small yet dense with presence. They circled the square, silent, unhurried, their outlines flickering between child and something older, vaster. They did not step forward, but their silence pressed upon me with unbearable clarity. The unravelling was nearly complete. Secrecy itself had become threadbare, unable to conceal what drew breath at the heart of the world. As darkness fell fully, the trees' glow flared suddenly, blossoms shining like stars shaken loose from their moorings. The square blazed with their light, illuminating every corner, erasing shadow. The hidden ones receded just as swiftly, but the message was plain. The door was near to opening, and when it did, no realm, mortal or divine, would stand apart from what emerged. The air cooled, the glow faded, and night reclaimed its dominion. Yet the tremor persisted, deeper, louder, steady as the tread of countless unseen feet approaching closer with each breath. The tread of unseen feet pressed heavier with each night, a pulse that travelled not only through soil and stone but through marrow, through dream. Villagers moved more quietly, as though their voices might hasten whatever walked nearer. The blossom tree no longer glowed in gentle rhythm but burned in sudden bursts, as if struggling to contain what strained within. Petals fell and smouldered before fading, leaving faint scorch marks upon the ground. Even the children avoided play beneath it now, whispering instead from doorways, eyes too wide for their years. I journeyed farther north, to a plateau where mountains parted like gates, revealing a valley hushed by perpetual snow. There, upon the frozen plain, I saw a child unlike the others. They stood barefoot on the ice, yet steam rose around their souls as though fire met frost. Their hair was streaked white and black, strands twisting like storm cloud and ash. In their hands they cradled two stones, one glowing with inner heat, the other sheening with cold light. They shifted the stones back and forth, never letting them touch, as though guarding the fragile seam between fire and frost. When their gaze met mine, I felt both burning and freezing at once, as if my body were caught between contradictions that refused to yield. They tilted their head, and I heard a voice, not in my ears, but in the clash of elements themselves. If balance breaks, all falls. If balance holds, none rest. The words left me trembling, for they spoke not of mercy but of strain eternal, the ceaseless tension that keeps the world upright. Then the child pressed the stones to their chest, and with a flare of light they vanished into the snow, leaving only a faint hiss where frost met embers. That night, stories spread of rivers boiling while snow fell upon their banks, of hearths burning cold while ice glowed with warmth. The people grew afraid, believing contradictions themselves had begun to warp. Some elders muttered that this was a foretaste of Ragnarok, when fire and frost would collide. Yet, in their fear, I sensed a deeper truth. The secret children carried within them the contradictions the world could not speak aloud, bearing them in silence so that others might not fracture. In Asgard, unease reached a breaking point. The gods gathered in council beneath the rafters, the knot door above them breathing visibly now, its seams leaking light like water from a cracked dam. Thor thundered that he would smash it open and face whatever lurked within, though Frigg's voice, soft but stern, stayed his hand. "Not all doors are meant for hammers," she warned. Loki grinned at her words, eyes glittering, though whether in admiration or mockery, none could tell. Odin said nothing, but his silence weighed heavier than speech. His hand never left Gungnir, yet he did not rise. That night my dreams carried me not to halls or forests, but to a vast plain of darkness. At its centre stood the secret brood, countless now, arranged in a great circle. They were silent, yet their silence was command. In the middle of their ring pulsed a light small but fierce, like a heart still forming. I understood then. Their secrecy had not been only to shield the world, but to shield something still unborn, some truth not yet ready for the gaze of gods or mortals. I tried to step closer, but the circle tightened. Their eyes upon me, not cruel, not gentle, but firm. "Not yet," the silence said. When I woke, dawn brought no relief. The village found its shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching westward even under morning sun. The blossom tree stood stripped of petals, its branches trembling though no wind stirred. Children cried without knowing why, while elders pressed charms to their chests, whispering names of gods with voices that shook. I felt it too. Secrecy was thinning to breaking point, and whatever had been carried in silence now pressed against the skin of the world. That evening I climbed to the ridge above the valley, where sky spread vast and cruelly clear. From that height I saw lights moving along the horizon, not stars, not torches, but something walking processions of shadows shaped like children, their glow faint but unyielding. They marched without sound, their steps in perfect rhythm, stretching as far as sight allowed, and though distance lay between us, I felt their gaze fall upon me, heavy as stone, sharp as frost, fierce as fire. The air thickened, and for a moment I thought I heard their voices, a murmur like rivers braided together, saying nothing I could understand, yet filling me with certainty that the waiting was almost done. The knot door would not remain closed much longer. The blossom tree's silence, the trembling shadows, the contradictions of fire and frost, all were heralds of a truth too long contained. Night fell swiftly upon the ridge, and the horizon swallowed the lights. I descended with slow steps, the weight of inevitability pressing upon me, for I knew the march I had glimpsed was not dream, nor omen, but the truth itself striding closer. The secret children, once whispers, once shadows, once mercies hidden in silence, were gathering for revelation, and the world, whether ready or not, would soon be asked to look upon them fully. The march I had glimpsed upon the horizon did not fade from memory. Its rhythm lingered like a pulse beneath the earth, steady and insistent, a tread that belonged not to mortals but to something older, more patient. Each night, as stars wheeled above, the sense of approach deepened, a drumbeat without sound pressing against rib and soil alike. The blossom tree stood stripped and silent, yet its trunk quivered faintly as though windless gales moved through its core. None dared speak aloud, but all felt it. The moment of secrecy was waning. I wandered to the coast where cliffs fell sheer into black water. The sea surged with unusual fury, not storm but restlessness, as though tides themselves anticipated disclosure. There, upon a promontory slick with spray, I saw a child kneeling, their hair whipped about like tangled seaweed, their eyes reflecting waves unbroken by horizon. They reached into the water and withdrew a handful of foam, holding it as though it were treasure. The foam hardened into pearl-bright stone, then dissolved back into spray. They repeated this act again and again, forming and unforming, shaping and releasing. Watching them, I felt the ache of beginnings abandoned, of promises never carried through, of births that yielded nothing. Yet their persistence was not despair, but necessity. For not every shaping is meant to endure. When they raised their gaze to me, I felt the undertow of countless failures, but also the grace that lies in trying again. Without word, they submerged into the sea, their form dissolving into wave, leaving only the sound of water shaping itself against rock. I lingered long after, listening to the sea's repetition, a hymn of attempts eternal. That night, fishermen swore the ocean turned to glass around their boats, waves halting mid-rise, fish swimming suspended in stillness. For hours they sat upon a frozen sea that was not ice, but paused time. When the waters resumed, their nets spilled with such abundance that they wept, unable to decide whether to rejoice or to tremble. Rumours spread quickly. The hidden ones were weaving gifts, so great they threatened to undo balance itself. In Asgard, the tension grew sharp as spear tip. The knot door above the rafters now bled light constantly, pale ribbons pouring like smoke. The gods gathered in heavy silence. Thor struck his hammer against stone, sparks scattering as he demanded release from secrecy through strength. Freya whispered that love itself was shifting, drawn towards something hidden that no vow could bind. Loki smirked, muttering that truth unspoken is the sharpest trick of all. Odin remained unmoved, his gaze fixed on the door, his silence darker than any answer. For though he spoke not, all sensed that he had long known this march, and that knowledge cut him deeper than ignorance. My own dreams grew heavier. I found myself standing upon a bridge of bone that stretched across a void. Beneath me marched the hidden children, endless in number, each carrying fragments of the world, embers, seeds, whispers, stones, tears. They laid these fragments at the void's edge, weaving them into something unseen, their labour tireless, their silence absolute. Above them stood Odin, his one eye dimmed by weariness, his hand clenched but motionless. He watched, yet did not intervene. I tried to call to him, but my voice dissolved before leaving my lips. Waking brought no comfort. Villagers reported dreams identical to mine, their voices hushed with dread. Even children whispered of bridges and fragments, their small hands clutching nothing as though they had carried burdens through sleep. The shared visions proved that secrecy had spilled into communal knowing. The brood no longer haunted only edges. They had stepped into the shared fabric of mind. At dusk, I walked again to the square. Shadows gathered, longer and darker than their forms, stretching like ink across the cobblestones. Within those shadows flickered faces, not fully formed, glimpsed only in the corner of vision. When I turned directly, they vanished. But the sense of multitude remained. The air pressed heavy, like storm held back by fragile dam. And then, from nowhere, a single blossom appeared upon the tree, glowing brighter than all that had fallen before. It pulsed once, twice, then withered instantly, curling into ash that drifted to the ground. The message was plain: endings approach even amid beginnings. I stood long into the night, listening to the silence that was not silence, but waiting. The footsteps beneath the earth grew louder, steady, relentless. The knot door swelled with light, seams straining as though one more breath might burst it wide, and though no child stood visible beside me, I felt them all, shoulder to shoulder, gathering in readiness. The unravelling was no longer slow, it was upon us, as certain as dawn after longest night. The knot door above the golden rafters strained brighter with each passing night, seams trembling as though breath from another world pressed against it. The footsteps beneath the soil throbbed louder, felt even in vessels of water that rippled without wind. The villagers grew restless, eyes darting to shadows that seemed thicker, heavier, reluctant to release their shapes. and though no words were spoken, all knew that concealment had stretched to its limit. I wandered eastward into forests where birches whispered with voices like soft bells. In a clearing I found a child seated upon a fallen trunk, their skin luminous with silver glow. Their hands moved deftly, weaving strands of spider silk, dew and shadow into a cord so fine it was almost invisible. When I drew nearer, I saw that the cord bound together fragments, broken feathers, withered leaves, splinters of stone, a drop of blood dried black. Each piece shone faintly once joined, transformed from remnant into thread. The child looked up, eyes pale as mist, and though no words left their lips, I understood they were the gatherer of remnants, the one who wove what was discarded into strands that strengthened destiny. Their gaze pierced me, and I felt all I had thrown aside in my life, the forgotten kindnesses, the wasted chances, the silences heavy with meaning. Each fragment rose in memory, and I realized that nothing abandoned truly vanishes. The child's cord shimmered with the burden of all worlds, a tapestry of overlooked things. Then they tied the thread into a knot that pulsed once with light before vanishing, leaving the clearing empty save for the faint scent of birch and dew. When I returned to the village, I heard whispers that broken tools had mended themselves, that scraps of cloth had woven into whole garments, that forgotten graves glowed faintly at night. The gatherer's work was upon the land, drawing the discarded back into weight. Some rejoiced, calling it miracle. Others shuddered, fearing the dead had been called too close. In Asgard, the gods' debate flared hotter. Thor's hammer cracked the floor as he demanded an end to secrets. If they wish to stand among us, let them stand. If they bring doom, let us meet it openly. Loki laughed, but the sound held unease, for even he knew trickery falters when faced with truths that weave themselves from what has been ignored. Frigg pressed her palm against her heart, her silence trembling with sorrow that seemed to know more than speech could bear. And Odin, he sat still as stone, one eye on the knocked door, his knuckles pale upon Gungnir's shaft. He spoke no command, for what leader dares give order to inevitability? That night my dreams carried me deeper. I walked into a cavern lit by no flame, yet alive with glow from walls inscribed with countless runes. Children moved along them, tracing each symbol with reverent fingers, as if reciting prayers too old for tongues. Their voices merged into hum, low and steady, vibrating the stone until dust fell from the ceiling like soft rain. In the cavern's center stood a pool of black water, unbroken. One child approached, antlers crowning their brow, and dipped a hand into the pool. Ripples spread, and within them I saw the gods themselves, faces proud yet strained, watching the knot door as though it were both cradle and coffin. The ripples widened, swallowing the visions, and the pool returned to stillness. I woke drenched in sweat, the echo of that hum still shivering in my chest. By dawn, the world itself seemed thinner. The air shimmered faintly, as if the fabric of realms had grown threadbare. Animals paused mid-motion, staring into empty air as though recognizing forms invisible to human sight. Children woke speaking riddles of places they had never seen, naming rivers and mountains that did not exist upon any map. The blossom tree, stripped bare, stood rigid, but in its trunk glowed faint veins of light, pulsing as though it bore a heart. That evening, as twilight deepened, I walked again into the square. The ground trembled beneath my feet, faint but steady, and from the shadows I felt countless presences gathering. The silence pressed so heavily that even the wind stilled, even the river hushed, and then, above, the knot door flared once with brilliance, flooding the sky with pale fire. The light poured outward, staining clouds, washing earth in glow that silenced breath itself. It faded swiftly, but its mark remained burned into the eyes of all who saw. The unravelling had entered its final strain. Secrecy was no longer shield, but shroud, thin and failing. The hidden children stood at the threshold, waiting only for the scene to yield, and the world, trembling beneath their tread, braced itself for the moment when silence would become revelation. The brilliance that had flared from the knot door left the world hushed, as if every creature awaited an echo that never came. Villagers stumbled in silence, their eyes still burned with pale afterglow. The blossom tree quivered violently that night, light coursing through its veins until its branches arched upward as though straining to split the sky. Even when the glow subsided, its bark smoked faintly, the scent of sap mingling with ash. No one dared approach it, for all sensed it now served as beacon, drawing unseen multitudes nearer. I wandered to the mountains, where peaks pierced the clouds, each ridge sharp as blades. There, upon a crag lit faintly by aurora, I found another of the hidden brood. This child was tall for their kind, shoulders draped in a cloak stitched from wolf pelts. Their eyes gleamed with feral fire, their breath steaming in the cold. At their side, proud shadows shaped like beasts, wolves, stags, serpents, each flickering between flesh and smoke. When they looked upon me, I felt the primal law of predator and prey stir. Ancient and unbroken, they did not raise a hand, but the beast circled, testing my steadiness. The child's gaze bore through me, neither cruel nor kind, but absolute. I understood then. They were keeper of the hunt, the balance that stalks through fang and claw, the necessity of taking life so that life may continue. They embodied a truth too raw for temples, a truth that civilizations forever seek to tame, yet never can. For an instant, their beasts froze, their eyes all fixed upon me, and I knew my life could have been theirs. Then the child exhaled sharply, and the shadows scattered into the night. Without another look, they walked into the storm, and the mountains howled behind them. When I returned, stories already spread. Hunters claimed deer approached without fear, standing still until arrows pierced them, as if choosing their own end. Fishermen swore nets burst with catch, yet every fish stared upward with eyes too calm, as if offering themselves. These were mercies and burdens both, for abundance weighed heavy when it felt chosen rather than taken. The people whispered of sacrifices veiled within plenty, of blessings that demanded reverence. In Asgard, discord swelled. Thor roared for war, declaring the hidden brood dangerous. Frey, troubled, admitted the harvests grew too lush, threatening to exhaust fields. Frigg closed her eyes, whispering of inevitability, her voice trembling like wind through reeds. Loki laughed, but his laughter cracked at its edges, for he too felt the weight of truths that mock disguise. Odin remained still, though his silence had grown heavier than thunder, as though even his tongue feared to give shape to what pressed upon him. That night, my dreams thickened into vision. I stood again before the knot door, now wide as canyon mouth. Light poured outward, not pale but fierce, streaked with gold and shadow interwoven. Figures moved within, countless children striding in silence, each bearing fragments of creation: flame, frost, river, stone, antler, feather, tooth. They stepped as one, their tread thunderous yet without sound. Odin stood before them, his spear lowered, his face carved in grief and awe. He did not raise his weapon. He only bowed his head, as though greeting inevitability. I woke to trembling ground. The villagers poured into the square, pointing to the blossom tree. Its trunk had split, light searing through its core, roots groaning like wounded beasts. From the split issued a low hum, deep and unceasing, resonating through soil, water, bone. The people fell to their knees, some in prayer, others in terror. They did not know to whom they bowed. That evening, shadows thickened along the horizon once more. But unlike before, they did not fade. They advanced, steady, countless, a procession spilling across hills and valleys. Their forms were blurred, yet their eyes glowed unmistakably, childlike yet immeasurable. They walked shoulder to shoulder, their silence louder than any trumpet. Animals fled before them, yet winds bent toward them, rivers still to mirror their march. I stood at the ridge, and watched, my breath shallow. The hidden children had ceased to be hidden. Their secrecy, once shield and shroud, had torn open like split bark, and what pressed outward now strode with purpose. The march was no longer whisper nor dream. It was real, advancing, vast. And though the night spread calm, my heart knew storm. For when they reached the knot door, when their multitude pressed into its light, the world itself would tilt, perhaps break, perhaps be remade. The footsteps of inevitability were no longer beneath the ground. They were upon it, walking steadily toward revelation. The march advanced, spreading across valleys like tide that could not be turned. The glow of countless eyes shimmered faintly, constellations walking upon earth. Each step sent tremors through stone and soil, not violent but steady, like the drumbeat of inevitability. Villagers gathered on ridges and rooftops, their faces pale in the moonlight, watching in silence. None dared shout, none dared flee. It was not fear alone that held them. It was reverence, unwilling and unbidden, rising from marrow itself. I stood among them, heart unmoored, as the hidden brood crossed fields that had once seemed vast, now too small to contain their multitude. Their forms flickered between children and something more, silhouettes wreathed in antlers, cloaks of feather, eyes burning with frost or flame. Some carried nothing, yet the air bent around them as if they bore mountains upon their shoulders. Others moved as shadows of rivers or storms, their steps leaving ripples in grass that glowed faintly before fading. Each was unique, yet together they walked in unbroken rhythm, a unity that mocked the divisions of mortals and gods alike. In Asgard, the tremor was felt as well. The knot door swelled wider, light spilling into the hall so brightly it painted the gods in pale fire. Thor lifted Mjolnir, but his arm shook, not with weakness but with doubt. Freya's tears shone as diamonds, her lips forming prayers for mercy. Heimdall leaned upon Gylehorn, though he dared not blow it, for the sound might call war too soon. Loki smiled thinly, muttering that he had always loved secrets, yet even his voice trembled, stretched taut between awe and dread. And Odin, he stood, his cloak heavy, his single eye fixed on the advancing multitude. He raised Gungnir once, then lowered it, as though even the All-Father knew his spear could not pierce inevitability. That night, my dreams carried me into a plane of mirrors again, but this time the mirrors shattered as I walked, shards rising into the air and forming paths of light. Children walked upon these shards, barefoot yet uncut, their reflections infinite in every sliver. One child approached, bearing a crown of woven branches that bled sap. They placed it upon my brow, and I felt the weight of witness, unbearable, yet inescapable. "You will remember," they said, though their lips did not move. "Even when others cannot bear it, you will remember." The crown dissolved into smoke, and I woke gasping, the taste of sap bitter on my tongue. By morning, the world itself seemed to lean closer. Shadows lengthened at strange angles, bending not with sun but with presence. Wells whispered faintly, words half-formed in the echo of buckets drawn. The blossom tree stood hollow now, its trunk cracked wide, but from its hollow pulsed light that throbbed in time with the march. Villagers gathered around it, torn between kneeling and fleeing, their voices hushed with awe. Toward evening, the procession reached the foothills beyond the valley. I climbed to meet them, though my knees quaked. As they passed, the air thickened, pressing into lungs until breath became labor. They did not look at me, yet I felt seen more deeply than ever before. Every fault, every kindness, every hesitation laid bare. One child paused, a figure with hair streaked silver and black, carrying a cord of fragments woven tight. They turned their heads slightly, acknowledging my presence, and in that simple gesture I felt my existence affirmed, as though my small witness had weight in their vast design. Then they moved on, vanishing into the multitude. Behind me, the villagers whispered of omens sharper than ever, animals bowing before invisible hands, fires bending away from homes, but leaping high in open fields, rivers surging backward at dusk. The land was reshaped by presence alone, as if the hidden brood carried the authority of creation in their silence. The fear of gods mingled now with mortal fear, for even divine strength seemed brittle before the advancing tide. That night, the stars wheeled overhead. I heard the march reach the mountains. The ground quaked softly, steady as heartbeat. In the distance, faint light shimmered at the horizon. Not dawn, not fire, but the glow of the multitude pressing closer to the knot door. The seams of that door widened further, spilling radiance that coloured clouds, staining them gold and shadow alike. And in the quiet that followed, I knew the moment drew near when secrecy would tear fully open, when the brood would no longer be children hidden in whispers and omens, but figures standing in light undeniable. My heart ached with both longing and dread, for revelation carries both gift and wound, and once given, no silence can reclaim it. The horizon glowed with the light of the advancing multitude, no longer faint but full, a tide of radiance that drowned the night. The earth trembled beneath their march, steady, ceaseless, echoing through roots and stones, until even mountains seemed to shiver with unease. Villagers clung to one another upon the ridges, watching with breath caught tight, as though afraid a single word might summon the attention of those who strode beneath the heavens. None dared turn away, for to look upon the hidden children was terror, and to refuse to look was worse. I stood among them, my chest heavy as the glow washed over us, revealing more clearly the shapes within the procession. They no longer flickered as shadows or suggestions. Their forms grew solid, though never bound fully to flesh. One bore a crown of fireflies, another a mantle woven from frost that did not melt. Another carried a broken shield that glowed as though it still defended unseen warriors. They were not gods, nor mortals, nor shades, but something between truths given form, secrets clad in stride. And in each of their eyes burned light older than sun, more patient than stone. At the heart of their march, towering above all others, I glimpsed a figure draped in cloak of twilight itself. Their face was obscured, their hands veined with light. The air bent around them as though refusing to hold their shape, and though no name passed their lips, I knew with certainty that this was the firstborn of secrecy, the one who had gathered the brood in silence through ages. The pulse beneath every omen, their presence alone pressed tears to my eyes, for it was not cruelty nor kindness I felt, it was inevitability vast and unyielding. In Asgard, the gods arrayed themselves at the knot door, the glow spilling upon their faces. Thor gripped Mjolnir until sparks leapt from its head, his rage no longer bluster, but shield against dread. Heimdall pressed the Gjallarhorn to his lips, yet held back, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. Freyja's tears fell unceasing, and her hands clasped as though in prayer not to gods but to fate itself. Loki leaned upon a pillar, his smile gone, his eyes wide, whispering only to himself. And Odin, all-father of hosts, planted Gungnir's point into the floor, his voice low as thunder rolled in his chest. They come. The knot door shuddered, its seams stretched wide. From beyond came a sound like breath, deep and endless, as though the universe itself inhaled. The children's march rose toward it, their tread aligning with that breath, until the world itself pulsed to their rhythm. The gods shifted uneasily, for even their dominion trembled beneath the unity of silence. That night, sleep did not bring dream, but vision, clear as waking. I stood at the gate of Asgard, my body frail as dust, yet my eyes open to all. The hidden brood approached, and with each step their forms grew sharper. They carried not weapons, but burdens, grief wrapped in stone, joy threaded through cloth, wrath bound into bone. They bore all things that had ever been cast aside, all truths whispered, but never spoken. The weight of their burdens glowed, and I saw that it was not destruction they carried, but memory, every fragment too heavy for gods or men to bear alone. When the vision faded, I woke with tears upon my face. The villagers stirred as well, for they too had seen. Children wept without knowing why. Elders trembled though their hearts had long been hardened. We had all been touched by revelation, and none could return to ignorance. As dawn broke, the sun itself seemed pale beside the light of the march. Birds did not sing, rivers did not murmur. The world hushed, bowing before the approach. I walked once more to the square where the blossom tree now stood as hollow shell. Its final branch cracked and fell, shattering into dust that glowed faintly before fading to nothing. Where once blossoms had scattered, now only light poured upward, streaming into the widening knot door above. And then it began. The foremost of the hidden children reached the foot of Asgard's gate. They halted, not from fear but from order, their ranks stretching across valley and hill. The great figure at their centre lifted their veined hands, and silence deepened until it pressed against the skull like stone. For a heartbeat the world held still, balanced upon edge of change. And in that stillness, Odin's single eye glowed, fierce and sorrowful both. He stepped forward, raising his spear not in threat but in salute, for he knew what all of us now knew. Secrecy had reached its end, and with its end, the world would never again stand as it had before. The march stood poised before the threshold, awaiting the breath that would tear open veil entire. The stillness before Asgard's gate was deeper than silence. It was as though time itself had paused, unwilling to intrude upon the meeting of what had been hidden and what had ruled. The vast multitude of the secret children stood unmoving, their countless eyes glimmering like scattered constellations, their burdens glowing faintly in their arms. Opposite them, the gods waited, each posture rigid, each breath a weight. Between them yawned the knot door, its seams torn wide, light spilling outward in trembling veils, hungry to consume yet patient as a tide. The figure at the heart of the children raised their veined hands higher. Their cloak of twilight billowed, though no wind stirred, and the air bent heavily around them, a gravity of inevitability. When they opened their mouth, no sound emerged, yet meaning flooded the marrow of every witness. It was not language, but truth, raw, searing, impossible to deny. We heard it within our blood. We are the unspoken. We are the unseen. We are what you cast aside, yet cannot kill. Their silent words trembled through the bones of gods and mortals alike, a revelation too vast for tongues. Thor roared, unable to contain his fury. He hurled Mjolnir high, lightning cracking against the pale sky. The hammer flew swift, its thunder shaking mountains. But before it struck the foremost child, it faltered. In mid-air the weapon slowed, caught in invisible hands. The hammer hung suspended, its sparks snuffed into nothing, and then, gently, it lowered itself to the earth, where it sank into soil without a sound. Thor fell to his knees, not from defeat, but from the weight of inevitability pressing him down. Freya's tears streamed freely, and she reached out her arms as though to embrace the children. Yet they did not move toward her. Her love, radiant and fierce, could not bridge the gulf between secrecy and revelation. Loki laughed once, sharp as breaking glass, and whispered, "So this was the jest all along." But even his trickster's mirth could not mask the tremor in his voice, for he understood that the greatest trick was truth unhidden. Odin alone stepped forward, his cloak dragged across the stone, his spear's point ringing as it struck sparks. He raised his single eye to the twilight figure, and for the first time in ages, sorrow softened its fire. "I knew of you," he said, his voice a weight upon the air. "I sought to hide you even from myself, yet here you stand." His words were no denial, no command, but confession. The twilight figure bowed their head, not in reverence, but recognition. They extended a hand veined with light, and Odin trembled. The air between them shimmered as though the veil itself wavered, moments from tearing wholly apart. All around, the multitude of hidden children shifted. Some wept soundlessly, their tears falling as stars that burned out before touching ground. Others lifted their burdens higher, the fragments of forgotten truths glowing fiercer. Shadows curled at their feet, mingling with radiance until day and night bled together. Mortals on the ridges fell prostrate, unable to withstand the mingling of awe and terror. Even the rivers stilled, their waters holding breath. In that moment I felt the weight of memory crash through me. Visions of every encounter I had witnessed. The child weaving remnants into thread, the one shaping foam into nothing, the gatherer of bones, the beast-cloaked hunter. Each face, each gesture, returned, not separate, but strands of one tapestry. The brood were not scattered enigmas, they were a chorus, voices of what had been silenced, and now that chorus swelled, pressing against the veil, ready to break into song. A crack split the knot door, jagged and radiant. Light gushed forth, scalding yet beautiful, staining the air with brilliance. From beyond came a low hum, deeper than mountains, older than oceans, the sound of what lay hidden too long. Now drawing breath to emerge, the twilight figure's hand trembled near Odin's, their closeness aching with both reunion and rupture. The villagers gasped, clutching each other, eyes wide with awe. Some whispered prayers, others sobbed without words, and I, frail among them, felt my heart strain as though it would burst. Torn between terror and longing, for revelation was at hand, and with it the world poised upon the cusp of unmaking and remaking alike. The knot door quivered, its final seam weakening, the breath of beyond pressing harder. The hidden children leaned forward as one, their multitude unbroken, their burdens blazing brighter, and Odin, still unmoving, let Gungnir fall from his hand, the spear clattering against the stone, echoing louder than thunder. The sound was not an ending but a summons, for the veil had only one breath left before it yielded, and with that breath, the truth of the secret children of Odin would no longer remain secret at all. The clatter of Gungnir upon the stones still rang in the air. Its echo carried far across ridges and rivers, across realms themselves. It was the sound of surrenders and summons both. The sound that said, "The veil will not hold." The knot door groaned, its final seam thinning like glass struck by thunder. Light pressed harder, trembling, spilling through cracks that spread wider with each heartbeat. The twilight figure's hand hovered close to Odin's, their silence a language deeper than speech. And in that closeness lay all the weight of hidden time. Then, as though the world inhaled, the seam gave way. The knot door tore open, not with explosion but with a long sigh, a release of breath held through ages. From beyond it poured light, neither warm nor cold, shimmering with both dawn and dusk, the mingling of beginnings and endings. The radiance fell upon gods and children alike, stripping them of shadow, revealing each line of grief, each scar of silence. The air thickened with truth, so dense it pressed into skin, bone, soul. The hidden brood stepped forward. Their multitude spilled into the light, their burdens glowing brighter. The fragments they carried, stones, feathers, blood, ash blazed like jewels, revealed as not remnants but essences. Each fragment pulsed with memory, and together they wove a pattern that shimmered across the sky, threads of everything ever silenced. It was beautiful, terrible, endless. Mortals fell to their knees, tears spilling freely, for in those threads they glimpsed their own forgotten moments, kindness never spoken, grief never mourned, hope abandoned. Nothing had been lost. Everything had been carried. The gods stood transfixed. Thor bowed his head, no longer raising his hammer. Freyja's tears glowed as pearls upon the ground. Loki turned away, his smirk dissolved into something raw, unguarded, perhaps even regretful. Heimdall lowered the Gjallarhorn, for no sound of warning was needed now. The warning had already become revelation. Odin's face, carved with centuries of silence, softened. He reached toward the twilight figure, his hand trembling, and their light-veined fingers touched his. The air rippled, the sky itself bending, as though acknowledging reunion long denied. His voice broke the stillness. You are mine, and yet not mine. You are the silence I sought to bury, and the truth that returns. His words did not bind them, but admitted what all now knew. The children lifted their burdens higher. The light within them grew, weaving into shapes vast and shifting, mountains rising, seas surging, forests spreading, stars igniting. Each vision lasted only a breath before dissolving. But in those breaths the world glimpsed its own hidden architecture. Mortals wept and laughed, unable to contain so much beauty and sorrow at once. The very ground quivered, not from destruction but from transformation, as though roots and stones themselves remembered what they had once been meant to hold. I stood among the villagers, my body frail, yet within me surged something vast, a recognition that shook me to marrow. For I saw that the secret children were not strangers at all. They were the forgotten parts of every soul, the silences of gods, the unspoken grief of mortals, the discarded truths of the world itself. They were not separate from us. They were us, revealed. The twilight figure turned their veiled face toward me. In their gaze I felt my own discarded moments return, the words I never dared to say, the prayers I abandoned, the kindness I withheld. Each fragment pulsed, not to condemn me, but to remind me that nothing is ever erased. They lifted a hand, and light poured over me, heavy and soft at once, searing yet soothing. I trembled, but did not look away. Then the multitude moved deeper into the radiance. Their march continued, but no longer upon soil. It crossed into the unveiled space beyond the knot door. They did not vanish. Their light remained, woven into the world like threads too bright to fade. Every step they took remade the fabric of what was known, stitching new paths that even the gods could not unmake. The villagers clutched each other, whispers trembling on their lips. The gods themselves stood changed, their faces stripped bare of certainty. And I, weak yet unwilling to turn, felt that this was not ending but becoming. The children were no longer hidden, no longer secret. They had stepped into their place, and the world bent to include them. Yet, the radiance deepened, pulsing with rhythm vast as oceans. Something more stirred beyond, something not yet revealed. The twilight figure's hand lingered still in Odin's grasp, and their silence grew heavier, as if holding words that could not be delayed forever. The air hummed, the sky bent, and we all knew the greatest truth had yet to be spoken. The hum deepened, vast as oceans, unrelenting, filling marrow and stone alike. The light of the opened knot door pulsed with slow rhythm, as though the cosmos itself now breathed through its torn seam. The multitude of secret children glowed brighter still, their burdens flaring like constellations, each fragment radiating essence older than memory. And yet, though revelation had already reshaped the air, all felt that a greater truth trembled just beyond the threshold. The twilight figure stood at the center, hand still resting within Odin's. Their grip was not of conquest, nor supplication, but recognition, the meeting of silence long denied. The Allfather's single eye glistened, dimmed not by weakness, but by grief that bore awe. Around him the gods stood stripped of certainty. Thor no longer reached for Mjolnir. Freyja wept openly, her sorrow and love indistinguishable. Heimdall lowered Gjallarhorn to his side, accepting that no call could announce what had already arrived. Loki leaned in shadow, his smirk gone, his lips pressed tight as if holding back words too dangerous even for him. The twilight figure turned from Odin, their veiled face lifted toward the knot door, and from the light behind them stepped others. Not gods, not mortals, not the brood themselves, but shapes woven from time. These were memories clothed in form, the first spark that birthed fire, the first tear shed at a grave, the first laugh of a child, the first betrayal carved in blood. They emerged as living echoes, each walking beside the brood, as if memory itself had chosen to join the march. Mortals watching gasped, for within those echoes they glimpsed their own beginnings, their own griefs. Some fell weeping, others laughed uncontrollably, each overwhelmed by the recognition of fragments thought forgotten, now made flesh of light. The brood raised their burdens high, and the fragments shimmered into alignment. Threads extended from each piece, weaving into a vast tapestry across the sky. Stars bent to join it, rivers mirrored its pattern, winds sang its rhythm. It was the map of what had always been hidden, not territory of land or sea, but territory of truth. Every silence, every cast-aside thing, every moment veiled in shadow. Here it formed pattern, undeniable, too immense for denial, too intimate for escape. Odin's chest heaved, his voice rose, heavy as stone. "I feared you," he admitted, his words trembling across the light. "Not for what you were, but for what you revealed of me. I buried my secrets in you. I cast away what I could not bear, and now you return, carrying what I fled." His confession echoed, and even the gods flinched, for they too recognized themselves in his words. The twilight figure lowered their head, their silence answering more fully than speech. Their hand left Odin's, and at once the air thickened, the bond severed, not in rejection but in release. The brood stepped forward into the knot door, one by one, their forms merging with radiance, their burdens dissolving into the tapestry above. Yet they did not vanish. Their light remained woven into sky and soil, echoing through every breath of wind, every tremor of earth. Mortals whispered that the world felt both heavier and lighter, as though sorrow had deepened but also shared, no longer borne alone. Some pressed their palms to the ground, swearing they felt the hidden children move still beneath the soil. Now not concealed but integrated, farmers found their crops sprouting in strange patterns, fields forming sigils unknown yet soothing, rivers split and rejoined, flowing in braids that mirrored the tapestry overhead. The world reshaped itself, subtle yet irreversible. I stood trembling in the square, light pressing upon me, until I could no longer tell where my body ended and the truth began. In me too, fragments stirred, the words unsaid, the kindnesses withheld, the regrets long buried. They rose not to condemn, but to remind me that nothing had been lost. Every silence had been carried, and now returned. My chest ached, my knees weakened, but I did not turn away. The gods too stood altered. Their eyes shone hollow with recognition, for the brood had not simply revealed themselves, they had revealed the gods, their flaws, their silences, their hidden wounds, all mirrored back at them in light unbearable. And yet, within that burden lay strange relief, for what was exposed no longer festered in shadow. The twilight figure, last a step forward, turned once more before vanishing into radiance. Their veined hand rose in gesture, neither blessing nor curse, but acknowledgement. Their gaze swept across mortals and gods alike, lingering as though to say, "You are not separate from us. You have always been us." Then they crossed into the brilliance, their cloak of twilight trailing like smoke, until only light remained. The knot door did not close. It remained torn, its edges glowing, its breath steady. Through it poured rhythm vast and calm, reshaping the cadence of the world. The march had not ended. It had shifted, for though the brood had entered beyond, their presence lingered everywhere, woven into soil, stone, sky. And in the hush that followed, as mortals and gods alike staggered beneath the weight of what they had seen, a new silence spread. Not the silence of secrecy, but the silence of waiting. For even revelation was not final. Something deeper still moved within the light. Something yet to step forth. Something yet unspoken. The world, remade, held its breath again. The silence that followed their passing was not absence, but density, heavy with presence too vast to name. The knot door remained torn, light spilling steadily into the world. Unhurried, breathing like tide, mortals and gods alike lingered in its glow, unsettled by revelation, yet unable to draw away. The hidden brood had stepped into the brilliance, yet their essence remained, woven into sky, soil, breath, and though we trembled, we knew their story was not ended. The tapestry stretched across the heavens, still shimmered, threads of memory and secrecy glowing faintly, shifting in patterns like constellations newly born. Each star seemed closer, each cloud slower, as though the rhythm of time itself had been bent to new measure. Rivers ran calmer, their surfaces mirroring not only sky but strange sigils of light. The wind carried voices that were not words but echoes, murmurs of truths once hidden, now free. The villagers wandered in quiet awe. Some pressed their palms against the earth, swearing they felt heartbeats beneath the soil that were not their own. Others stood beneath the open sky, whispering to loved ones long gone, believing their words carried into the glowing weave above. Fear mingled with wonder, but neither overcame the other. Instead, they entwined a braid of emotions that felt ancient yet new. In Asgard, the gods bore the revelation differently. Thor sat slumped, his hammer still sunken into the ground where it had refused his will. His chest rose and fell with laboured breath, his strength vast but subdued beneath a force that mocked mere power. Freya's tears stained her garments, yet her face shone with a strange serenity, as though grief itself had revealed hidden beauty. Heimdall's eyes glowed, reflecting the weave above, his vigilance turned inward, watching what could not be guarded against. Loki paced in silence, his shoulders hunched, his smirk abandoned, his gaze darting between light and shadow, as if searching for escape from truth. Odin alone remained steady, his single eye fixed upon the torn veil, yet even his steadiness trembled. For what all father can command, what lies beyond command. I felt it too, the hum beneath the earth, the rhythm vast as oceans. It pulsed not with menace, but with inevitability. My body, frail and weary, quivered as though carrying more than bones should. Yet I could not turn away. The Notdor's light called to me, not as flame calls moth, but as sea calls river, a summons impossible to resist. And then the light shifted. From the brilliance stepped a figure, not child, not God, not memory, but something greater, woven of all. Their form shimmered, ever-changing, at one glance crowned with antlers, at another wreathed in flame, at another cloaked in shadow. They bore every fragment of the brood, every silence, every discarded truth. They were the chorus made flesh, the multitude embodied, the air bent around them, heavy yet tender. When they stepped forward, the ground glowed beneath their feet, each stone igniting before fading. Their gaze swept across gods and mortals alike, and within it I felt myself laid bare more fully than ever. My regrets, my kindnesses, my failures, all seen, all acknowledged, yet there was no condemnation in their gaze, only weight, a reminder that nothing escapes the weave of memory. Odin stepped forth again, his voice breaking the stillness. You are the secret I buried, the truth I feared, yet you are also what sustains us, what binds us unseen. His words shook, not with weakness but with admission, for he knew, as all of us did now, that the brood were not intruders upon the world, but the threads that had always held it. The figure inclined their head, and the light deepened, pulsing once, twice, like heartbeat of cosmos itself. The tapestry above rippled, stars bending in response, rivers quivering as though echoing. The figure raised a hand, and silence spread wider, denser, pressing upon us until thought itself grew heavy. In that silence came recognition. The greatest truth had not yet been spoken, but it was near, balanced upon the threshold like dawn before horizon. The villagers clutched each other. The gods leaned forward. My own breath caught, for the figure's hand remained raised, their silence louder than thunder, their gaze fixed not on past nor future, but on us, all of us who watched, and in that gaze was promise, vast and unfathomable, of a final unveiling yet to come. The raised hand of the figure lingered in the light, a gesture that seemed to hold sky and earth alike in suspension. Every breath around me slowed, as though lungs themselves awaited command. The gods stood unmoving, their faces bared of masks. Mortals clutched each other, yet no one dared break the silence. Even the rivers stilled, their currents halting as if pausing to listen. The world leaned closer, trembling upon the cusp of revelation. The figure's form shimmered, ever shifting. At one heartbeat they bore the face of a child, innocent and unscarred. At another they aged into an elder whose eyes carried galaxies of memory. Their cloak flickered between twilight, dawn, and deepest night. They were all forms and none, woven of the multitude. When they finally lowered their hand, the air quivered, the light deepened, and their voice came, not sound but truth pouring directly into marrow.
We are the silence you abandoned. We are the truths you cast away. We are the children of Odin, yet also of every breath, every grief, every hidden thing. We are what you could not bear, but what cannot be denied.
The words shuddered through the gods, through mortals, through stone. Thor bowed his head, Mjolnir forgotten. Freya pressed her hand to her heart, her tears glowing in the light. Loki's eyes flickered wide, and for once his lips carried no jest, only awe. Heimdall shut his eyes, hearing truths that no horn could echo. And Odin, he trembled, his single eye shining wet, his shoulders bending beneath the weight of his own hidden silences, returned to him. The brood around the figure lifted their burdens once more. This time, the fragments they carried, stones, bones, feathers, ashes, rose from their arms and floated upward. Each fragment glowed brighter, joining the tapestry across the sky, weaving into pattern vast as eternity. Stars bent closer, rivers mirrored brighter, winds sang in harmony. The tapestry pulsed once, twice, thrice, and then steadied into rhythm, calm as heart at rest. The villagers fell to their knees, not in fear but reverence. They saw in the pattern their own hidden truths, their own forgotten kindnesses, their own unspoken griefs. Some wept softly, others smiled through tears, for they understood the secret children were not apart from them, but part of them, threads that had always been woven through their lives. The burden of silence was no longer carried alone. I felt it too, surging within me. My regrets, my withheld words, my moments of cowardice and kindness alike, all rose within, shimmering, no longer lost. They were carried, witnessed, woven into pattern. My heart ached, but with relief as much as sorrow, for to be seen so fully was to be freed from weight, long hidden. The gods, once proud and unyielding, now stood softened, humbled. Their dominion had been pierced, their secrets laid bare, their flaws acknowledged. Yet within that stripping came a strange peace. They were not destroyed, they were revealed, and perhaps revelation was the truest form of endurance. The figure turned their shifting face once more toward the knot door, still torn, still glowing. Their gaze lingered there, deep and unreadable, as if something beyond the veil awaited yet. Then they looked back upon us all, mortals, gods, earth, and their silence swelled again, heavy, final, undeniable. The air thickened, the ground quivered. The tapestry pulsed faintly overhead, its rhythm steady. Yet beneath that steadiness, a deeper tremor stirred. For though much had been unveiled, one truth remained still hidden, balanced upon the edge of dawn. The figure stepped forward, their cloak trailing twilight and dawn alike. They raised their hand again, but this time not in stillness. It was a summons. The light of the knot door brightened, flaring as though the cosmos itself strained to release its last secret. Mortals gasped, gods braced. My own knees quivered beneath the weight of waiting. For the greatest unveiling had yet to arrive, and its breath now pressed against the veil. Ready to emerge, the light of the knot door swelled until it was no longer a seam but an expanse, horizonless, infinite, trembling as though the universe itself strained to release its last withheld breath. The figure, woven of twilight and dawn, lifted their hand higher, their cloak trailing fragments of every silence ever carried. The brood around them stilled, their burdens now dissolved into the sky's great tapestry, their forms shimmering as echoes of what they had been. Gods and mortals alike stood motionless, their gazes fixed upon the threshold, for all knew that the final unveiling pressed near, and then it came. From the radiance stepped no multitude, no army, no form to bear burden or command. Instead, the light itself leaned forward, pouring outward, not as brilliance, but as clarity. Within it shone no shape, but countless reflections, the faces of every soul, god and mortal, living and gone. Each of us looked into the light, and saw ourselves returned, our silences and truths laid bare, our fragments joined to the whole. The final secret was not another child hidden, nor a figure waiting beyond. The final secret was us, that the brood had never been separate, but had always been the hidden weave of all being. The figure turned to Odin, their face shifting until it bore his likeness, and then Freyja's, and then mine, and then countless others. We are not apart, the silence within them said. We are what you have cast aside, what you thought forgotten. We are your children because you are our parent, your silence because we are your voice. We are the truth that waits within you. Odin fell to his knees, his spear still abandoned, his eye dim with tears. Thor, unbowed by giants or storm, lowered his head. Freyja pressed her hands to her heart, her love spilling across the silence like balm. Even Loki wept softly, the trickster undone not by chains but by truth. Mortals wept too, yet their tears carried not only fear but release, for to be seen so holy was to be freed from the weight of secrecy. The light spread outward, across ridges and rivers, through forests and seas. It touched stones, beasts, winds, stars. Everything quivered as hiddenness dissolved. Rivers sang the griefs they had swallowed. Stones pulsed with memories of ancient tread. Winds whispered of words never spoken. Nothing remained silent. And yet, within the great chorus, there was calm, for revelation did not burn the world. It remade it gently, weaving each silence back into the whole. I felt it within me most keenly. Every moment I had thought lost, each withheld word, each kindness abandoned, each grief unspoken, rose within me, not to torment, but to comfort. They returned as companions, carried always by the brood, until I could bear them again, and in that moment I understood. The hidden children had never walked apart from us. They had always been the keepers of what we could not hold, returning now to show us that nothing is lost, nothing erased. The knot door ceased its trembling, its edges steadied, no longer a wound but a passage. The brood within the light shimmered one last time, their forms dissolving, their burdens fully given back to the world. The twilight figure lowered their hand, their cloak of dawn and dusk unravelling into threads that joined the tapestry above. Their gaze lingered upon us, warm and unyielding, before they too dissolved into the radiance. The light pulsed once more, softer, then receded until only the weave across the sky remained, vast and serene. Silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of secrecy. It was the silence of peace, of truth spoken, of burdens shared. The villagers rose slowly, their faces tear-streaked but calm. The gods stood humbled, their power tempered by revelation, their silence broken forever, and I, trembling yet steady, felt the weight within me ease, for I knew I carried them always, the children, the fragments, the truths. The blossom tree, long hollow, shimmered faintly. From its cracked trunk sprouted a single new shoot, green and tender, reaching upward toward the woven sky. It was small, fragile, yet it glowed with life undeniable. The people gathered around it, not to worship, not to fear, but to remember, for they understood that life endures not by forgetting, but by holding, not by casting aside, but by weaving all things into the whole. Night deepened. Stars shone through the tapestry, brighter than before, yet softened by the weave of light that now bound them. The rivers resumed their flow, steady and clear. The winds carried whispers, not of dread, but of remembrance. And in that calm, we lay down our heads, knowing the hidden brood walked no longer beneath our feet, nor behind our shadows, but within us, inseparable. Thus ended the unveiling of the secret children of Odin. Not in thunder, not in flame, but in revelation quiet as dawn. They were never monsters, never strangers, but the unspoken parts of ourselves, carried until we were ready to bear them again. And though the gods themselves bowed before that truth, it did not undo the world, it remade it gently, as a seam torn only so it could be rewoven stronger. So rest now, in the hush of their memory, for the children of Odin are not gone. They breathe within you, within earth, within sky. Their silence has become song, their secrecy peace, and in their truth, the world finds its stillness once more.